Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Again, it's my honor to join you again in this hopefully a brief presentation, but yet I think it touches the lives of each one of us. It actually touches the lives of each one of us in this topic. So, being from an academic institute, King Khalid University, we said we need to start this year with hopefully more production in the research fields. To begin with, I have no disclosure to show, and for the topic outline, I'll be just briefly going through this bi-directional effects of the COVID-19 that we have all seen about the effects on the COVID on the medical research and what occurred during that one. I'm going to touch base with some national research output about COVID and what are the predictions for the 2021. And I'm going to share with you some practical tips that I found useful in our journey. Again, for the as you can see that during this pandemic, there was unprecedented research wise worldwide, and probably this is the first time in history that such a huge, tremendous amount of research that came, and so you can consider it like the it's like the two faces for the same coin. Again, there were although there were some real challenges for this real-time pandemic research, still it is vitally important to recognize opportunities and the factors that affected this research and how to strengthen them. Especially we are from the pediatric side, so how to strengthen the pediatrician scientist workforce. So looking at this cup, again, this is the half full, half empty. So I asked this question at the beginning of our presentation, and let me share with you the results of what our colleagues mentioned in the survey. I was trying to put it as a poll, but unfortunately the poll option was not available. So I'll just share with you quickly what our colleagues mentioned about their research output in 2020 as compared to 2019. So I have only a few votes are there. So some of them mentioned that it was less than 2019, and some mentioned that it is more than 2019. So again, I think you will be the best one to judge how was your research productivity or your research publications. Productivity is always there, but there was so much circumstances that changed in 2020. So how was the impact of the COVID on the research? It was very rapid, dramatic, and it will have a long-term effect. There was a huge interruption, especially if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, on most of our academic, industry, governmental basic science, and clinical research. And there were so much of the research resources redirected to the COVID-19, which is expectedly. Many clinical trials were paused after being initiated before the pandemic, and most of the ongoing trials were either closed for the new enrollment or they were modified to enable the home administration of the treatment or the virtual monitoring, the virtual enrollment of the research candidates. This was mainly to minimize the participants' risk of having the COVID infection, as well as to preserve the healthcare resources for the pandemic response, which were needed during the surge capacity. The careers of physician scientists, our young researchers, also was hugely affected in 2020. These research disruptions, they may have threatened some careers of these young scientists. and especially that some of them had to shift gears towards from the research to direct patients care during the health crisis. Some strategies that were implemented in some academic institute to mitigate the long-term impact of the research disruptions included the support to retain the currently well-trained research personnel and research support teams, as well as to accommodate for the loss of research assets, including the laboratory supplies, the study participants, all required to maintain them so that once the pandemic is over, you can enable the new research to continue from where it's stopped without huge interruptions, hopefully. The reallocation of the research funds at the expense of the research areas funded prior to the pandemic were clear for many ongoing researchers. And more important than ever for the pediatric research community was to engage in discussion and decisions regarding the prioritization of funding goals for the dedicated pediatric research and meaningful inclusion of children in the studies. These were some of the aspects that were occurring. So for the COVID-19 research, probably most of you have noticed there was a lot of huge research coming. Unfortunately, there were many lives that were lost with the pandemic. The economies, some economies even collapsed or were strongly affected. And the life as we know it was radically changed to a new norms of life. The crisis resolution required the high quality research aligned with the top priority social goals that produces trustworthy data and actionable information. So it's not enough to have research that is just publications and research, and so you need a high quality research, but the issue is here you need it fast so it can improve the outcomes during this health crisis. And I'm quoting here from this article commentary about the COVID impact on research, lessons learned from about the implication for the pediatric research. They mentioned that this global pandemic once again highlights the importance of research, stable research infrastructure, and funding for public health emergencies and disaster preparedness, response, and resiliency. So it's clear that while the priority goals are treatment and prevention, still the biomedical research provides data that is vital to manage and restore economic and social welfare. Some peculiar issues in this pandemic were that the scientists and technological knowledge and resources have never been greater and have never leveraged globally to perform the COVID research at an extremely rapid speed. And this was very well noticed, and probably this is one of the achievements during this crisis of how to, for example, very clear example is the rapidly checking which treatment modalities really worked and which were really not working. Another very clear example is the rapid research on the vaccination, that within months, in less than a year, you got a trial in stage 3 that produced 3 vaccines that were rolled over globally. And the number of studies that were related to the COVID-19 increasing daily, with a scope and magnitude of engagement that was really stunning, and the extent of the global collaboration was unprecedented. At this very rapid evolution of the research in the COVID dimensions, even there was some of the artificial intelligence, the AI, that were used to screen these new research trials and just to present them in a meaningful way for the humans, for the researchers, for the clinicians, to read about what is meaningful research from this huge amount of research that was coming every day. So clearly we had an accelerated research timeline. I'll just take you a step backward. 1 year back, almost exactly 1 year back, actually, January 5th. At that time, the genetic sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was released, only a few weeks after being first reported in China. And in the middle of the year, in May, we had at that time around 1,200 studies COVID-related, including about 150 studies related to hydroxychloroquine, 13 to the remdesivir, 50 to the vaccines, 100 to diagnostic testing. So all of these studies, only a few months after the pandemic started, were already registered on the clinicaltrials.gov, and about 1,000 studies of various studies were registered also on the WHO platform, empowering the development of the antivirals, the immunomodulators, the antibody-based biologic agents, and also the vaccines. In April last year, the FDA launched the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program. Again, in April, the NIH announced a partnership with the industry to expedite the vaccine development. In May, the remdesivir was granted the FDA emergency use authorization, and so on. So it was really a rapid growth of this research. Of course, we had that was the pro side. The con side of this acceleration in this crisis rush for related data, there was thousands of manuscripts, new reports, and blogs that were published. And however, maybe there was relatively limited scientifically robust data, but again, this is only relatively. And some studies were not meeting the published clinical trials standards, which include the FDA's COVID-19 specific standards, or the published without peer review as a preprint. So these all had to be kept in mind for any clinician when you are looking at research publications that relate to the COVID, that you have to check how reliable, how solid this data, especially if it is before the peer review process. Again, unfortunately, there was some misinformation from some studies that diverse, and this will be diverting the resources from development and testing of a more promising therapeutic candidates, and it could endanger even lives if misinformation is wrong issues to be used for the treatment. Again, the misinformation also may have given us some danger about some therapeutic modalities. For example, the ibuprofen, if you remember, initially they were reported that it could be unsafe for patients in COVID-19, which resulted in shortage of acetaminophen, endangering the individuals for whom the ibuprofen was considered as contraindicated. The hydroxychloroquine was initially reported as potentially effective for the treatment of the COVID-19, which resulted in shortages of patients with autoimmune diseases. So again, there was some bright side, but unfortunately the misinformation or the rush for the premature rush for some research output, which was expected during the pandemic crisis, it could have had potential side effects on the patients and community. Again, we have the lights at the end of the tunnel through this research, the accelerated research. We had the vaccines that usually it takes 10 to 15 years to develop and to roll over globally. However, in less than a year, for example, in the middle of the year, we had about 100 vaccine candidates were in development, and several of them were in the trial process. And luckily enough, alhamdulillah, in December, we had several vaccines that were already approved for to be launched in several countries, which is really crucial at this time, especially that we are seeing a new peak or a new wave of the COVID mutations. So vaccine came immediately in time, which is due to this accelerated research and efforts. Another good example about the bright aspect of the research is the antibody testing, which is necessary for the diagnosis, therapeutic, and the vaccine development. It presented some greatest research challenges initially, including the validation, timing, availability, and prioritization of the testing, as well as the interpretation of the test results and appropriate patient and social actions based on the results. However, these became more clear and more evident with time. The relaxing physical distancing without to also another issue for this research output is if you want to decide about relaxing physical distancing measures without solid test validity and the duration, the strength of the immunity to different strains of the COVID could have catastrophic results. So research was actually becoming a real-time research that the policymakers will depend on it whenever they are making some changes in the ongoing measures. We have to remember that we have population differences, and understanding these disparities, which have been further exposed during this pandemic, is critical for the current response as well as for the long-term pandemic recovery phase. And that's why there was the Equitable Data Collection and Disclosure on the COVID-19 Act, which calls for the CDC and other healthcare agencies to publicly release their racial and demographic information to be available for all the researchers. On the regional side, we had the COVID-19 research with Saudi Arabia ranking first regionally and 17th globally in the coronavirus research. And this was mainly coming from the Saudi universities, which published about 83% of the kingdom's COVID research productivity. In the middle of the pandemic, there were still initially some shortage of the research. So we have this by colleagues from our university who showed that when they did this scoping review about the COVID-related research from Saudi Arabia, they found 53 articles with most of the research production from Saudi Arabia was opinion-based and narrative reviews related to the clinical pathological feature of the COVID-19, as well as control and prevention of the virus spread. However, as things progressed, today when I search for the COVID-19 and only King Khalid University on PubMed, it's returned 387 results. Of course, many of them are collaboration, international collaboration, but still it was remarkable. Some of the studies were locally based, like this one, the effect of the coronavirus disease 2000 pandemic on the routine pediatric immunization. Others were based on international collaboration, such as, again, this inborn error of type 1 and the immunity in patients with life-threatening COVID, which a couple of our colleagues, dear colleagues, also co-authored this paper. So this research output is progressing rapidly for us also in Saudi Arabia. Of course, we have a need for pediatric COVID research that, despite children being relatively spared from the severe COVID-19, still the spread of the disease by children and the consequences for their health and pediatric healthcare are potentially profound, with immediate and long-term impact on all of the society. Understanding the differences in epidemiology, susceptibility, manifestations, and treatment of COVID-19 in children can provide insights into this pathogen-host interactions, pathophysiology, and host response for the entire population as well. And as of 5th of January, as of yesterday, when we search on the clinicaltrials.gov, so out of 4,371 COVID registered studies, there are 755 that include children who are less than 18 years of age. And from these, from around 2,500 interventional trials, 229 of them also include children in the same portal. So this is all very promising news for us as pediatrician. Hopefully we will be getting more and more research highlights for our pediatric age group. Surely we will be looking for the trusted and up-to-date sources. That's why there is emphasis how to disseminate the trustworthy resources among our trainees, among our staff. Some examples of the easily accessible information that must be identified is like the WHO portal on the COVID research, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and this high quality of data would provide more clear strategy-wise and crisis standards to guide the clinical practice, both in the current stage as well as beyond this pandemic crisis, hopefully soon. For the healthcare innovations, again, research to develop and evaluate innovative strategies and technologies to improve access to care, management of healthcare and disease, quality, safety, cost effectiveness of care could revolutionize the healthcare system. And one of the examples we have used or we have been utilizing is some of the remote video conferencing like the Zoom platform, which we have been using in our educational process. Also, we used it on the clinical side. We are using it for the handover of patients. We are using it for clear communication among the healthcare workers to enhance the social distancing, at the same time to empower our patient safety and high quality of care. Some of this pandemic research take-home messages that we can share together is the long-term lessons learned from the research during this crisis could benefit the research enterprise worldwide beyond the pandemic and during other disasters. We always seek the efficient strategies to balance between the multiple novel approaches and the high quality, time efficient, and cost effective research. We need to invest in appropriate study designs, collaborations, patient registries, automated data collection, artificial intelligence, data sharing, and ongoing consideration of appropriate regulatory approval processes. I will here share with you, bear with me, a slide is slightly busy, but let's read it because this is a quote again from this publication that I mentioned about that during the healthcare disasters, the crisis standards for research should be considered along with ongoing and just-in-time disaster training for researchers willing to share information that could be leveraged at the time of crisis. A dedicated funded core workforce of researchers and funded infrastructure should be considered, potentially as a consortium of networks that includes physician scientists, basic scientists, social scientists, mental health providers, global health experts, epidemiologists, public health experts, engineers, information technology experts, economists, and educators to strategize, consult, review, monitor, interpret studies, guide appropriate clinical use of data, and inform decision regarding effective use of resources for the public health emergency disaster research. So again, I know it's a very busy slide, that's why I quoted it, but I feel that each word of it is really meaningful during our current phase. And it's really like a take-home message for the future, how we can prepare ourselves, better preparation for any potential disasters, whether it's hopefully never, but if it happens, we will be all better prepared once we have these in hand. Just quick tips, as I promised you, although each one of them will require more time, but I'm just gonna spare some tips for the sake of time. So again, I will just emphasize on collaboration, and this pandemic was a clear example of how the collaboration was going either at a national level or across countries, which really helped in a quick collaboration in the research and quick more productivity in this research field. The timing is crucial. So any timing that is delayed, it may give a huge delay for the research and the output. So Previously, we were counting the years. Now, during the pandemic, sometimes not only counting the months, counting the weeks makes a difference. One example is during the vaccine in December, the rapid dissemination of the results about the vaccine trials and how they were rolled out. It was a huge success story that needs to be shared together rapidly to improve the healthcare data dissemination. Funding, again, the struggle of the funding. So always consider looking for alternate resources for funding during a crisis. The ethics has to be always kept as a priority for our conducting of the research. So, and luckily, if you have an IRB which will give a prioritize the research that relates to the crisis, to the pandemic. So that's what we had in our university. We had expedited, and several extra IRB sessions were dedicated for the COVID research, which really helped to approve several studies rapidly. Think about your logistics, how you're gonna move through the proposal, data collection, to move the data collection also to become more of a virtual, to optimize your social distancing measure, how you're gonna optimize writing the results together, and how you can also make a parallel writing of your manuscript data. And about the journal choices, to keep them in mind early, the high quality editing for you and for your peer reviews, referencing, submissions, all of these, think about them early so you can win this time to publish even to publish as your preprint before the official launching, before the official peer review is published. And several journals actually will encourage you to do a preprint, especially that relates to the COVID. And also there's a WHO requirement to report any clinical trials on COVID, to report them to the WHO, because that really could help the efforts to become more uniform collaboration worldwide. Again, for the young researchers to be aware of the predatory journals, the spam messages that will come more electronically. They will come invite you for research, which could be just a spam or could be just a phishing email. So you have to be aware of these. The research dissemination, as we mentioned, one of the things that were not noticeable during this pandemic is the research through the social media platforms, which will give you also more credit for your research and more rapid translation. I will just end up my topic with this slide that I took from one of the webinars so they were mentioning about how the research and the market should join the efforts going from ecosystem to ecosystem. So this collaboration is really useful, and I will just mention that it should take the umbrella of the real scientific collaboration between whether it's inside your same department, inside your same academic institute, national level, international level, all hopefully will be useful for us. In summary, this bidirectional impact of the COVID pandemic on the research highlights the importance of research, challenges of research, particularly during the disasters, and opportunities and resources for making research more efficient and cost-effective. The new paradigms and models for research will hopefully emerge in 2021 and even beyond that. The importance of building sustained public health disaster research infrastructure and a dedicated research workforce is emphasized. Investment in pediatrician scientists and the integration of pediatrician research personnel into high quality research across demographics is again warranted. And again, collaboration facilitates research, and we have seen that, and hopefully it will evolve better with time, hopefully. And thank you all for your time and attention, and always stay safe. I will encourage every colleague of us to go ahead and register for the vaccination, and hopefully we'll be out of this pandemic in the nearest time, inshallah, together. And for you, if you have any suggestions or any things you want. This is my email, and thank you all. And we'll open the floor for any questions, please.